Hello everyone, we will be reviewing the endocrine system unit, and I just wanted to start off by stating that these review sessions and slides are just based off the notes that I had taken when I was a student, based off the lecture videos and the unit notes material provided by Dr. Curley. I just want to start off by also saying that always use those notes as your primary source, as that is what you will be tested on. This is just the information condensed into something that is easier to digest and just to refresh your memory. Um, my advice to you is just to use the study guide as well, just to gauge your understanding of the material. If you can easily answer the questions without looking at your notes, then you should be good on that topic. But if you are unable to do that, I highly suggest reviewing that topic until you are more comfortable with that. And then once you are able to easily understand it, answer the question, then you should be fine for the unit quizzes and exams. But yeah, that's just my advice going forward within the semester of how you can tackle preparing yourself for these quizzes and exams. Okay, let's just start off with knowing the differences between an endocrine and an exocrine gland. Exocrine glands are going to produce chemicals in the gland, and these chemical secretions are excreted out of the duct leading to the exterior of the body. Examples of these chemical secretions are your sweat, saliva, tears, breast milk, and digestive juices, such as those from the pancreas and the liver. Endocrine glands, on the other hand, produce hormones that secrete hormones into the bloodstream or internal environment. Examples of these structures that secrete hormones are the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, adrenal gland, and the kidney, thyroid, and parathyroid gland, testes, ovaries, and the pancreas. You may have noticed that I mentioned the pancreas twice when listing examples of the endocrine and exocrine. That is because the pancreas has both endocrine and exocrine properties, which we will go into in another slide. Okay, now based off my past experience as a student, you may see some questions asking you about the nervous system and the endocrine system. So it's important that you understand the differences between the two systems and the similarities. The nervous system is going to consist of neurotransmitters or neurons. These neurons are fast-acting electrical impulses and chemical signals in some cases are sent via neurons to relay messages to target tissue and organs. Effects of these signals are short-lived and stop quickly. The size of the affected area is also very targeted and specific. In comparison, the endocrine system uses chemical messengers or hormones released by the endocrine glands into the bloodstream. The release of hormones is slower and can take a few hours to a few days for the chemical messengers to be released or reach the target cell with the appropriate receptor to bind to. But effects can last longer due to the levels of circulating hormones within the bloodstream. Hormones or chemical messengers can target more than one tissue or target organ. The endocrine system has more general and widespread affected areas, unlike the nervous system, which is more specific in its targets. Okay, now on to the similarities between the two systems. The nervous and endocrine system can both regulate each other. Neurons can trigger hormone secretion. For example, neurons in the hypothalamus secrete releasing and inhibiting hormones, which trigger the secretion of hormones from the anterior pituitary gland, also known as the adenohypophysis. Hormones can stimulate or inhibit neurons. For example, cortisol, a stress hormone released from the zona fasciculata layer in the adrenal cortex of the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys, can inhibit the release of serotonin and dopamine from neurotransmitters. Both systems can have overlapping effects on some target cells. Norepinephrine, as a neurotransmitter, and glucagon, produced by the islets of Langerhans and secreted by the pancreas when circulating glucose is low, can cause glycogen, stored glucose, to break down in the liver. Chemicals can function as both hormones and neurotransmitters. You might recognize dopamine as a neurotransmitter if you've taken a psychology class, but dopamine can also function as a hormone that inhibits the release of prolactin from the anterior pituitary gland. Finally, some hormones are secreted by neuroendocrine cells. Neuroendocrine cells, or neurons, are the axons you see traveling from the hypothalamus to the neurohypophysis, or also known as the posterior pituitary gland, for that hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. The hormones secreted by the neurons are oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. Oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone are produced by the hypothalamus, but they will be secreted from the posterior pituitary gland. The hypothalamus and the pituitary gland are connected by the infundibulum. The infundibulum acts as a pathway for axons in the hypothalamus that carry oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone from the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary gland. The infundibulum also connects the hypophyseal portal vein. Also contains the hypophyseal portal vein, which releasing and inhibiting hormones travel through to target cells in the anterior pituitary gland to stimulate the releasing of hormones from the anterior pituitary gland. The hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract is the relationship between the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary gland. The hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system is the relationship between the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland. The posterior pituitary gland is a storage site for hormones produced by the hypothalamus. The two hormones which will be secreted from the neural hypophysis, or also known as the posterior pituitary gland, are oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. Oxytocin, when targeting the uterus, causes contractions during labor. It also results in milk letdown, which is the ejection of milk from the mammary glands in the breast. Antidiuretic hormone regulates water reabsorption in the kidneys. Keep this hormone in mind when we enter the urinary unit or urinary system. With that being said, information from this unit will continue to be relevant throughout the whole semester, so it's important that you understand the hormones now and add on to your hormone study tool as the semester goes on. The way I remember the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract system is by thinking of the axons as a train track. Oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone board the train station in the hypothalamus and travel to the neural hypophysis to rest before continuing on their travel. This is just a silly little story that I use to help me during tests. The hypophyseal portal vein, a specialized network of blood vessels, allows for releasing and inhibiting hormones from the hypothalamus to regulate the release of hormones from the anterior pituitary gland in a stronger concentration without much dilution. The hypothalamic hormones target the anterior pituitary gland and stimulate the release and inhibition of anterior pituitary gland hormones. All releasing and inhibiting hormones are hypothalamic hormones. It is important that you know the names and abbreviations of each of these releasing and inhibiting hormones, and how these hormones stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to produce and secrete its own hormones. Now on to the adenohypophysis hormones. To remember which hormones are produced and secreted by the anterior pituitary gland, think of the acronym FLAT PEG. Just exclude the E from the acronym as there is no hormone that pairs with the letter E. Follicle-stimulating hormone for F, luteinizing hormone for L, adenocorticotropin hormone for A, thyroid-stimulating hormone for T, prolactin for P, no E again, and then growth hormone for G for that flat PEG acronym. As mentioned prior, releasing and inhibiting hormones from the hypothalamus will target the anterior pituitary gland and stimulate or stop the release of hormones from the anterior pituitary gland. For example, gonadotropin-releasing hormones released from the hypothalamus stimulates the release of luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary gland, which targets the gonads into producing sex hormones. If you made it this far into the video, send me a message on Canvas with the phrase "Hippo on campus." Now, a lot of students get these two hormones confused, oxytocin and prolactin, because they both have to do with milk. Oxytocin is one of the two hormones secreted from the posterior pituitary gland. The way I remember the difference between the two when I was taking the course was O in oxytocin stands for out, leading to the ejection of milk from the breast. O equals milk out. Prolactin is produced and secreted by the anterior pituitary gland and has to do with the production of milk. The way I remembered this was thinking P in prolactin stands for production of milk.
Hormones can be regulated humorally, neurally, or hormonally. Neurally means the secretion or inhibition of hormones released is influenced by emotions or stress. Stress can trigger the adrenal medulla of the adrenal gland to release norepinephrine, increasing heart rate, blood pressure, and alertness to surroundings, triggering that fight or flight response. Humorally or non-hormonal regulation of hormones controls the release of hormones depending on other non-hormonal substances within the blood or body fluids. Levels of circulating glucose in the blood after a meal will trigger the pancreas to release insulin. Similarly, if glucose levels are low in the blood, it will trigger the pancreas to release glucagon to break down glycogen, which is stored glucose. Hormonally regulation of hormones is the secretion of one hormone is triggered by the production of another hormone. Thyroid releasing hormone released from the hypothalamus will trigger the anterior pituitary gland to produce and secrete thyroid stimulating hormone, which acts on the thyroid gland. Corticotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus triggers the anterior pituitary gland to release adrenocorticotropic hormone, which then acts on the adrenal cortex to produce cortisol. For this, just think of how any of the releasing and inhibiting hormones from the hypothalamus and the hormones in which they trigger to be released from the anterior pituitary gland.
Okay, now let's talk about hydrophilic versus hydrophobic hormones. Understanding which hormones fall under hydrophilic or hydrophobic will help you understand how they are transported through the bloodstream and where they bind to target cells. Starting with hydrophobic hormones, the name gives you a hint to their composition. These hormones are composed of cholesterol and lipid soluble, meaning they will dissolve in fat and not water, because they bind to transportation carrier proteins to travel through the bloodstream and will unbind from the protein to leave the bloodstream. Hydrophobic hormones act via an intracellular receptor in the cytoplasm or nucleus of the cell. Because they are lipid soluble, they are able to pass through the phospholipid bilayer and enter the cell, binding to the receptors on that cell's nucleus. Hydrophobic hormones are going to consist of steroids and sex hormones. So your thyroid hormones such as T3 and T4, cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, and aldosterone. A little silly memory trick that I use to remember the difference between hydrophobic hormones versus hydrophilic hormones is hydrophobic hormones are scared of water, so they need a floaty, that transportation carrier protein, to swim. They prefer the lazy river because they have a slower MCR. So that means they have a slower metabolic clearance rate, so it's going to take longer for these hormones or substances to clear the bloodstream. Hydrophilic hormones, on the other hand, are going to be composed of amino acids, proteins, polypeptides, meaning small proteins, um, and are water soluble, meaning they will dissolve in water. Because of that, they do not need a transportation carrier protein to move through the bloodstream, since they are water soluble and can dissolve within the blood plasma and be carried that way. They're going to act via a membrane-bound receptor that is located on the membrane of the target cell. So that's going to be outside of the target cell. Unlike hydrophobic hormones, where they are able to pass through the phospholipid bilayer and bind to receptors within the cell, to the cytoplasm or nucleus of that cell. So the hormones that are going to be related to hydrophilic hormones are going to be all releasing and inhibiting hormones, posterior pituitary gland hormones, and all anterior pituitary gland hormones. The little silly memory trick I use for this one is that hydrophilic hormones love water. So usually if it's something philic, that means you like it or like enjoy it, stuff like that. When it's phobic, you fear it. So hydrophilic hormones love water and are strong swimmers and don't need a floaty, so that transportation carrier protein. They do not need a floaty to swim through the blood plasma because they are strong swimmers. They enjoy fast water slides because they're also strong swimmers. So they have that faster metabolic clearance rate, that faster MCR. Okay, so the adrenal glands are located superior to the kidneys. They are right on top of the kidneys. There's a little memory trick I use to remember the order of the layers for the adrenal cortex, which is good fun run. And to remember the hormones to each layer, it's salt, sugar, sex. So the zona glomerulosa is the outer layer of the adrenal cortex. The hormone salt is mineralocorticoids. Aldosterone is a type of mineralocorticoids. Aldosterone will increase blood pressure by reabsorption of potassium and sodium in the kidneys. Zona fasciculata is the middle layer of the adrenal cortex. The sugar hormone is glucocorticoids. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid hormone that is a hypoglycemic hormone that increases blood sugar levels in response to stress. The zona reticularis is the inner layer of the adrenal cortex. The sex hormones are androgens, sex and steroid hormones, which are precursor sex hormones for growth and development. Okay, now the pancreas has both endocrine and exocrine properties. So the endocrine property are the islets of Langerhans. So these are the ones that are going to secrete hormones into the blood vessels. So the pancreatic beta cells are going to be the ones that produce insulin, and it's going to be secreted by the pancreas when circulating glucose levels are higher, and then the pancreatic alpha cells are going to produce glucagon, and that is going to be secreted by the pancreas when circulating glucose levels are low. The exocrine properties of the endocrine gland are the acini. They are going to secrete these digestive enzymes into the pancreatic duct, and then we will go over this in more detail within the digestive unit or the digestive system of this course. So just keep this in mind. You can see here like this little duct vessel that's going to lead into the duodenum. That is how those that is where the fluid secreted from the acini, those digestive enzymes are going to move through. Um, while these little endocrine cells, the light blue ones or the little darker blue ones that you see in here are going to be those islets of Langerhans. Those are the ones that are going to be secreting those hormones into the bloodstream. And you can see in one of the diagrams how there's like a blood vessel that's connected to the pancreas, and that's how those hormones are going to get there and circulate throughout the rest of the body. This is just something that I saw some students would get confused on, and I think it's just the terminology to understand the difference between hypo and hyper. So hyper means that something is going to be in an increased amount, while hypo means something is going to be in a little lower decreased amount. So hypoglycemic are going to be hormones that decrease glucose. They're going, or those blood levels, or those blood sugar levels. So that's going to be insulin. Insulin decreases your sugar levels, while hypoglycemic are going to be hormones that increase that glucose levels or those blood sugar levels. So that's going to be your norepinephrine and epinephrine, glucagon, and glucocorticoids. Those are all going to increase those blood sugar levels. Okay, now understanding the relationship between insulin, glucagon, glycogen, and glucose. So let's just start off with the definitions. Glucose is that sugar energy molecule. Insulin is going to be produced by the pancreas, by the pancreatic beta cells, and that's going to be released when blood sugar levels are high, and insulin is going to decrease those blood sugar levels because it's a hypoglycemic hormone, and it's going to store glucose as glycogen in the liver for later use. Glucagon is produced by the pancreatic alpha cells and is going to be secreted when blood sugar levels are low. Again, it's that hyperglycemic hormone, so it's going to increase that blood sugar level. So I usually like to think of it, the word gone at the end. I usually think, okay, glucose is gone, so when this is being released, we're going to re- um, release that stored glucose and increase that blood sugar levels because glucose is gone. So glucagon is going to increase that circulating blood sugar levels. And then glycogen is going to be that stored form of sugar or glucose within the liver and other structures of the body. And now the relationship between them is that blood sugar level is high, insulin takes extra glucose and stores it away in the liver as glycogen for later use. If blood sugar is low, glucagon breaks down glycogen into glucose for the body to use. That is the end of the review session here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or to Dr. Curley. If there's any confusions you may have based on the assignments or stuff like that, or anything that you're not exactly understanding within the study guide, because like I said, use the study guide to gauge your understanding, and if you're able to answer a lot of those questions perfectly fine, you are prepared for the exams. Um, and then I've also added some extra study links and resources within the announcements that I highly recommend you go through and look through. I've also added some other review videos from SSS Luis, Dr. K's other SSS, and who was my SSS when I was a student. I like a lot of his videos since he tends to go into a little bit more detail, and they honestly helped me organize my study notes into something that was a little bit more digestible for me. But yeah, that will mark the end of this review session.